Hello one and all, my name is Sirel Schmibelion, avid historian of Tamrielic lore. Welcome to my home. You've come here today to listen, to read, to learn. It is ever too easy in our troubled lives to forget the importance of history and a good education. Many of you here today are explorers. Your lives are often too full of excitement and danger to read every damp book passed over in abandoned forts and caves. Though these mundane etchings are worth far more than the paltry sums you give them away for in general stores. These books hold the knowledge of our histories, our peoples. They help us not only understand ourselves, but they often hold secrets of Aetherius itself, which even Hermaeus Mora would find alluring. I thank you all for joining me today, though I urge you to thank yourselves for making time to be here. You will leave here tonight with a mind chock full of Julianus's wisdom and a Debella's blessing of an ever-growing curiosity. Our mind's journey begins, well, at the beginning. Oh yes, before we get into tales of epic knights and warriors, we must first study the essence of the land itself. The Monomyth is a compilation of creation stories, and holds 7 parts. We will read each of which, and enjoy small amounts of discourse in between to make sure that we're all on the same page. Now settle down, my friends, pull in close to the fire. Help yourself to the various delicacies I've laid out before you. Grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, and let your mind wander as you hear the stories of creation. To begin, our book leads with a quote. In Mundus, conflict and disparity are what bring change, and change is the most sacred of the 11 forces. Change is the force without focus or origin. A very interesting perspective, is it not? And one which raises only more questions. What is change, really? Can we stop it? Why should we want to? And what would stopping it accomplish in the first place? We will come back to this quote after our reading today for further discussion. Simply put, the schism in the human Aldmeri worldview is the mortal's relationship to the divine. Humans take the humble path that they were created by the immortal forces, while the Aldmer claim descent from them. It doesn't seem like much, but is a distinction that colors the rest of their diverging mythologies. All Tamrielic religions begin the same. Man or Mer, things begin with the dualism of Anu and his other. These twin forces go by many names: Anu Padme, Anwiel Sithis, Ak-El, Satek Akel, is not. Anwiel is the everlasting, ineffable light. Sithis is the corrupting, inexpressible action. In the middle is the gray maybe. Nirn in Elnifex. In most cultures, Anwiel is honored for his part of the interplay that creates the world, but Sithis is held in highest esteem because he's the one that causes the reaction. Sithis is thus the original creator, an entity who intrinsically causes change without design. Even the Hist acknowledged this being. Anwiel is also perceived of as order, opposed to the Sithis chaos. Perhaps it is easier for mortals to envision change than perfect stasis, for often Anwiel is relegated to the mythic background of Sithis' fancies. In Yakutan folktales, which are among the most vivid in the world, Satek is only referred to a handful of times, as the Hum. He is a force so prevalent as to be not really there at all. In any case, from these two beings spring the Et-Ada, or original spirits. To humans, these Et-Ada are the gods and demons. To the Aldmer, the Aedra Daedra are the ancestors. All of the Tamrielic pantheons fill their rosters from these Et-Ada, though divine membership often differs from culture to culture. Like Anu and Padme, though every one of these pantheons contains the archetypes of the dragon god and the missing god. Now clearly, there is a lot to unpack here, so let's try to keep this simple. This book's goal, as outlined in this introduction, is an attempt to bring understanding to the key differences in Aldmer and human religion. The elves believe that the gods are their ancestors, while humans have oft lived in more appreciative understanding, that the gods created them through their own goodwill. We begin with, as I understand it, essence, or something. Whether or not there was always something, or nothing and then something, well, not for us to know. What we do understand, however, is that in this original essence, there were two opposite presences. Every culture has their own names for these forms, and for simplicity's sake, from now on I will refer to them as Anwiel and Sithis. Anwiel can be understood for now as order, while Sithis, rather, represents chaos. Change is something we all know well. We see it every day. We feel it now as our emotions evolve throughout this night. We can make it happen even as I pick up my glass of wine and take a sip. Anwiel, on the other hand, is not so easily understood. The Yakudans, or Red Gods as you might better know them, referred to Anwiel as Satek. In order to understand Satek, they often called this force the Hum, a consistent something, a force so prevalent that it may as well not be there at all. I ask you now, dear listeners, to close your eyes and be silent, just for a few moments. What did you hear? Think of the noises that filled the room as Sithis, and the silence itself as Anwiel. It's not that Anwiel is nothing, but rather a necessity. For how do you define that silence? And more importantly, how would the noise even occur if there was no silence? I cannot answer those questions because I live in this world. These simple truths of Anwiel Sithis are the building blocks upon which all of creation requires. From these two forces, the Et Ada emerge. And no, I cannot quite tell you how. The Et Ada, you see, is Old Elnafex for original spirits. These spirits are what you and I understand as the 8 divines, and the corrupting demons. The Aldmer referred to them as Aedra and Daedra, or ancestors and not ancestors. Humans first adopted these terms from the elves during the First Era, the time of our honored saint Alessia. The original empire wanted to create a unified pantheon with the elves, under which all peoples could pray together. This is the beginning of the 8 divines, or the Aedra, as we humans know them, as well as a story for another day. Moving forward, we'll learn of the key aspects shared by almost all creation stories. The text reads, The Dragon God and the Missing God. The Dragon God is always related to time, and is universally revered as the first god. He is often called Akatosh, whose perch from eternity allowed this day. He is the central god of the Cyrodiilic Empire. The Missing God is always related to the mortal plane, and is a key figure in the human Aldmeri schism. The Missing refers to either his palpable absence from the pantheon, another mental distress that is interpreted a variety of ways, or the removal of his divine spark by the other immortals. He is often called Lorcan, and his epitaphs are many, equally damnable and devout. Note that Tamriel and the Mortar Plane do not exist yet. The Grey Maybe is still the playground of the original spirits. Some are more bound to Anu's light, while others to the unknowable void. Their constant flux and interplay increase their numbers, and their personalities take long to congeal. When Akatosh forms, time begins, and it becomes easier for some spirits to realize themselves as beings with a past and a future. The strongest of the recognizable spirits crystallize: Mafala, Arkay, Ifri, Magnus, Ruptga, etc., etc. Others remain as concepts, ideas, or emotions. One of the strongest of these, a barely formed urge that the others call Lorcan, details a plan to create Mundus, the mortal plane. Humans, with the exception of the Red Guards, see this act as a divine mercy, an enlightenment whereby lesser creatures can reach immortality. Aldmer, with the exception of the Dark Elves, see this as an act of cruel deception, a trick that sundered their connection to the spirit plane. Now, we wouldn't be having a conversation on creation without the mention of the Dragon God and the Missing God. The Dragon God, which is of course referring to Akatosh, praise his name, while the Missing God is a reference to what some of you may know as Lorkhan and others as Shor, though he is known by many names. Before the conception of Akatosh, the ebb of time did not flow. Within the Grey Maybe, the time before, the Et Ada had little reason for the comprehension of self. Their existence simply was, and there is no way you or I could ever possibly imagine this existence. What I can tell you, though, is that with the birth of Akatosh, the other spirits were able to look within themselves, as well as backwards and forwards. They found a place for themselves in the universe and began to understand their role within it. During the age of time's conception, Lorkhan began to ponder the possibility of Mundus, our mortal plane. We humans, other than the Redguards, have always viewed this as an act of divine mercy. We were given life to experience, given life to create and cast our will upon the realms. Mundus seems to be created for lesser creatures to attain or simply get a glimpse of immortality and enjoy it while it lasts. The elves, though, foster the belief that their ancestors were trapped within this realm and lost all of their power because of it. For this, they spite Lorkhan and all that he represents. Next, we will take a look at the ancient Aldmeri view on creation. The text follows. The Myth of Orbis. Subtitled The Sigic Compensation, Mythic Orbis was an attempt by Artaeum apologists to explain the basics of Aldmeri religion to Uriel V in the early glorious part of his reign. It quietly avoided any blame or bias against the Lorkhan concept, which was still held in esteem by the Cyrodiilics as Shazar, the missing sibling of the Divines. Despite this, the Sajiki still gave a nice summary of the Elder view, and it will still serve our purposes here. This version comes from the archives of the Imperial Seminary from the handwritten notes of an unknown scribe. Mythic Orbis exists, and has existed from time without measure, as a fanciful, unnatural realm. Orbis is not to connote the imperceptible penumbra, the gray center between is not of Anu and Padme. It contains the multitude of realms of Aetherius and Oblivion, as well as other less structured forms. The magical beings of mythic Orbis live for a long time and have complex narrative lives, creating the patterns of myth. These spirits are made from bits of the immortal polarity. The first of these was Akatosh the Time Dragon, whose formation made it easier for other spirits to structure themselves. Gods and demons form and reform and procreate. Finally, the magical beings of mythic Orbis told the ultimate story, that of their own death. For some, this was an artistic transfiguration into the concrete, non-magical substance of this world. For others, this was a war in which all were slain, their bodies becoming the substance of the world. For others yet, this was a romantic marriage and parenthood, with the parent siblings naturally having to die and give way to the succeeding mortal races. The agent of this communal decision was Lorkhan, whom most early myths vilify as a trickster or deceiver. More sympathetic versions of this story point out Lorkhan as being the reason the mortal plane exists at all. The magical beings created the races of the mortal Orbis in their own image, either consciously as artists and craftsmen, or as the fecund rotting matter out of which the mortals sprung forth, or in a variety of other analogical senses. The magical beings, then, having died, became the Et Ada. The Et Ada are the things perceived and revered by the mortals as gods, spirits, or geniuses of Orbis. Through their deaths, these magical beings separated themselves in nature from the other magical beings of the unnatural realms. The Daedra were created at this time also, being spirits and gods more attuned to oblivion, or that realm closer to the void of Padome. This act is the dawn of the mythic era. It has been perceived by the earliest mortals many different ways, either as a joyous second creation, or, especially by the elves, as a painful fracturing from the divine. The originator of the event is always Lorkhan. As a reminder after taking all of that in, the text just read to you was originally written by a Sijic scholar to help Uriel V understand Aldmeri religion, meaning that the more traditional elves such as the High Elves share this view that we're about to discuss. Their belief begins with a discussion about Orbrus being the center of the Grey Maybe. This isn't meant to be taken literally. Directionally speaking, placement of the Orbis doesn't matter at all. Think of the Grey Maybe as a body. In this body, Orbrus would be the heart. Orbis is what allows the possibility of Aetherius and Oblivion, our realms and others. The heart is the meeting of Anwiel and Sithis within the Grey Maybe, and thus pumps their energy or blood together. This meeting of energy creates Orbis itself. Originally, magical beings lived in Orbis, the first of which is Akatosh. Akatosh is known to the Aldmeri to be the first spirit and bringer of time, known as the Time Dragon, which allows the magical beings to think and create their own myths, which, as we learned earlier, most cultures share this belief. The text then goes on to explain that Lorkhan orchestrated a fateful event. He tricked the other spirits into telling the story of their own death. This story, if Aldmeri belief is true, is what we're living in right now. The magical beings within the Orbis gave their lives to allow our less magnificent and mortal ones to exist, a decision that they would not have made if Lorkhan hadn't tricked them into it. In the telling of this story, the magical beings created mortals in their own image, meaning that we are created in the gods' images. As the humans believe, this was a gracious and beautiful decision. The gods worked as an artisan does with a heap of stone, creating our lives out of nothing. Though some believe that this wasn't much of a decision at all, and rather that we mortals sprouted from the gods' very defecation. This, though, sounds to me more like an emotional metaphor than any actual belief. With the magical beings now dead, they transformed into the Et Ada, or original spirits. Their death cursed them to become separate from their nature, and of course, the other unnatural realms. This curse sparks the entrance of the Daedra, believed to be spirits more attached to oblivion than the mortal realm. Their creation began the Merethic, or the Mythic era, and was also seen as further painful fracturing of the divine by the elves. This fracturing, and the earlier curse and death, all lands at the fault of Lorkhan. Next, the Monomyth delves further into myths of Lorkhan. Preceding individual cultural beliefs, it gives a brief overview of who or what Lorkhan is. The text reads, Lorkhan. This creator, trickster, tester deity is in every Tamrielic mythic tradition. His most popular name is the Aldmeri Lorkhan, or Doomdrum. He convinced or contrived the original spirits to bring about the creation of the mortal plane, upsetting the status quo much like his father Padme had introduced instability into the universe in the beginning place. After the world is materialized, Lorkhan is separated from his divine center, sometimes involuntarily, and wanders the creation of the Et Ada. Interpretation of these events differ wildly by culture. Below are some of the better known. This short passage illuminates the primary goal of the rest of the Monomyth, which is to define and describe Lorkhan under the guise of different cultural lenses. Moving forward, the text first explores the Yakuden understanding of Lorkhan's role. It reads, Yakuden, Satakal the World Skin. Satek was the first serpent. The snake who came before, and all the worlds to come rested in the glimmer of its scales. But it was so big that there was nothing but, and thus it was coiled around and around itself, and the world to come slid across each other, but none had room to breathe or even be. And so the worlds called to something to save them, to let them out. But of course, there was nothing outside the first serpent, so aid had to come from inside it. This was Akel, the hungry stomach. Akel made itself known, and Satek could only think about what it was, and it was the best hunger, so it ate and ate. Soon there was enough room to live in the worlds, and things began. These things were new, and they often made mistakes, for there was hardly time to practice being things before. So most things ended quickly, or were not good, or gave up on themselves. Some things were about to start, but they were eaten up as Satek got to that part of its body. This was a violent time. Pretty soon, Akel caused Satek to bite its own heart, and that was the end. The hunger, though, refused to stop, even in death, and so the first serpent shed its skin to begin anew. As the world died, Satekal began, and when things realized this pattern, so did they realize what their part in it was. They began to take names like Ruptka or Tuwaka, and they strode about looking for their kin. As Satekal ate itself over and over, the strongest spirits learned to bypass the cycle by moving at strange angles. They called this process the walkabout, a way of striding between the world skins. Ruptka was so big that he was able to place the stars in the sky so that weaker spirits might find their way easier. This practice became so easy for the spirits that it became a place called the Far Shores, a time of waiting until the next skin. Ruptka was able to sire many children through the cycles, and so he became known as the Tal Papa. He continued to place stars to map out the void for others, but after so many cycles, there were almost too many spirits to help out. He made himself a helper from the detritus of past skins, and this was Sep, or Second Serpent. Sep had much of the hungry stomach still left within him. Multiple hungers from multiple skins. He was so hungry he could not think straight. Sometimes he would just eat spirits he was supposed to help, but Tall Papa would always reach in and take them back out. Finally, tired of helping Tall Papa, Sep went and gathered the rest of the old skins and balled them up, tricking spirits to help him, promising them that this was how you reached the new world, by making one out of the old. These spirits loved this way of living, as it was easier. No more jumping from place to place. Many spirits joined in, believing that this was good thinking. Tall Papa just shook his head. Pretty soon, the spirits on the skin ball started to die, because they were very far from the real world of Satekal, and they found that it was too far to jump into the far shores now. The spirits that were left pleaded with Tall Papa to take him back, but Grim Ruptka would not, and he told the spirits that they must now learn new ways to follow the stars to the far shores now. If they could not, then they must live on through their children, which was not the same as before. Sep, however, needed more punishment, and so Tall Papa squashed the snake with a big stick. The hunger fell out of Sep's dead mouth and was the only thing left of the second serpent, while the rest of the new world was allowed to strive back to godhood. Sep could only slink around in a dead skin, or swim about in the sky, a hungry void that jealously tried to eat the stars. Now, the Yakuden myth is fairly simple to follow in theory, and can even be underestimated as a simple, enthralling bedtime tale for children. Though many truths and similarities to the other myths lie within its tellings, it's in the story's interpretations that complications arise. In Yakuden myth, it all began with Satek, the Great Serpent, an infinitely large coiling serpent. Since Satek was all, the only other place for something to exist was within Satek, his hungry stomach, which is also known as Akel. Notice here, my dear listeners, the already apparent similarities to other creation stories. We have existence and consumption, order and chaos, Anwiel and Sithis respectively. Soon, Satek began eating himself due to his hungry stomach, Akel, and his eating created empty space. In this empty space, other beings arose and were able to live. Before long, Satek ate his own heart and everything ended besides his hunger. His never-full stomach Akel urged him to continue consuming, so Satek shed his skin and began the process again. This is how Satakel, the Yakutan god of everything, began. A fusion of Anwiel and Sithis, the never-ending push and pull of hunger and consumption. As this process went on and on, the beings began to understand their place, and they even took names for themselves. These beings would become the gods of the Yakutan pantheon. This Yakutan myth is, in my opinion, pleasantly insightful, as it gives us scholars a particularly peculiar, though ever-intriguing perspective on creation. Personally, I find I can understand it more thoroughly with my Imperial mind, while considering it as a metaphor. As I mentioned in my retelling, the names in this story, such as Satek and Akal, can of course be attributed to Anwiel and Sithis. This goes further, though, when you consider Tal Papa as Akatosh and Sep as Lorkhan. When discussed with more well-understood names such as these, the core principle of the story shines. Similar to Aldmeri belief, Lorkhan tricked the other beings, our gods, into creating our world. He was thus punished and discarded. You see, when you take away all of the foreign names and cultural housings, misconception becomes much easier to avoid. It does raise the question, though, why do the Redguards, who are of course another human race, agree with the elves' telling of this story? Perhaps we will never know. Next, we finally study a more understood myth. The passage we will read next is known as Shazar's Song. Cyrodiilic, Shazar's Song. This was a new thing that Shazar described to the gods, becoming mothers and fathers, being responsible and making great sacrifices with no guarantee of success. But Shazar spoke beautifully to them and moved them beyond mystery and tears. Thus the Aedra gave free birth to the world, the beasts and the beings, making these things from parts of themselves. This free birth was very painful, and afterwards the Aedra were no longer young and strong and powerful, as they had been in the beginning of days. Some Aedra were disappointed and bitter in their loss, and angry with Shazar, and with all of creation, for they felt Shazar had lied and tricked them. These Aedra, the gods of the Aldmer, led by Ariel, were disgusted by their enfeebled selves, and by what they had created. Everything is spoiled for now and for all time, and the most we can do is to teach the elven races to suffer nobly, with dignity, and chastise ourselves for our folly, and avenge ourselves upon Shazar and his allies. Thus are the gods of the elves dark and brooding, and thus are the elves ever dissatisfied with mortality, and always proud and stoic, despite the harshness of this cruel and indifferent world. Other Aedra looked upon creation, and were well pleased. These Aedra, the gods of men and beast folk, led by Akatosh, praised and cherished their wards, the mortal races. We have suffered and are diminished for all time, but the mortal world we have made is glorious, filling our hearts and spirits with hope. Let us teach the mortal races to live well, to cherish beauty and honor, and to love one another as we love them. Thus are the gods of men tender and patient, and thus are men and beast folk great in heart for joy or suffering, and ambitious for greater wisdom in a better world. Now when the Daedra lords heard Shazar, they mocked him, and the other Daedra. Cut parts of ourselves off, and lose them forever? That's stupid. You'll be sorry. We are far smarter than you, for we will create a new world out of ourselves, but we will not cut it off, or let it mock us, but we will make this world within ourselves, forever ours, and under our complete control. So the Daedra lords created the Daedric realms, and all the ranks of lesser Daedra, great and small. And, for the most part, the Daedra lords were pleased with this arrangement, for they always had worshippers and servants and playthings close to hand. But at the same time, they sometimes looked with envy upon the mortal realms. For though mortals were foul and feeble and contemptible, their passions and ambitions were also far more surprising and entertaining than the antics of the lesser Daedra. Thus do the Daedra lords court and seduce certain amusing specimens of the mortal races, especially the passionate and powerful. It gives the Daedra lords special pleasure to steal away from Shazar and the Aedra, the greatest and most ambitious mortals. Not only are you fools to mutilate yourselves, gloat the Daedric lords, but you cannot even keep the best pieces, which prefer the glory and power of the Daedra lords to the feeble vulgarity of the mush-minded Aedra. This story is known to many of us already. Our neighbors and friends here in Cyrodiil believe it wholeheartedly, and have for generations. For most Imperials, this story is the epitome of their religious study. Though, do you not agree that it becomes more interesting in the light of the last few myths? We yet again see the dichotomy of Akatosh and Lorkhan, though notably there is no mention of Anwiel nor Sithis in this human myth. Many scholars use this fact to denote what they see as inherent pessimism in the elven views, a subject mentioned in Shazar's song itself, but I'll leave that aspect of the conversation to your own theories. Now, this story is also the easiest to follow, so I won't dismantle it the way I have the other chapters. Rather, I'll bring up a few important notes. Firstly, the story names two gods, the head of the Aldmer pantheon, Ariel, and the head of the Imperial pantheon, Akatosh. An interesting separation, and though we have little time to go over the specific, I urge you all to do some research here and study both of these figures independently. In this story, we also have mention of the Daedra, gods which many of you know as demons, creatures of evil. This myth clearly highlights what these demons are, entities who did not take part in creation. How many of them exist? Are they all inherently cruel? Sadly, I cannot answer those questions. Daedrology is where I draw the line in my scholarship. The threat of insanity and fates much worse than death are too common in that field. Finally, we will finish the Monomyth by reading the Altmeri creation myth, and try to tie all of these myths together afterwards. Altmeri, the heart of the world. Anu encompassed and encompasses all things, so that he might know himself, he created Anwiel, his soul in the soul of all things. Anwiel, as all souls, was given to self-reflection, and for this he needed to differentiate between his forms, attributes, and intellects. Thus was born Sithis, who was the sum of all the limitations Anwiel would use to ponder himself. Anwiel, who was the soul of all things, therefore, became many things, and this interplay was and is the Orbis. At first, the Orbis was turbulent and confusing, as Anwiel's ruminations went on without design. Aspects of the Orbis then asked for a schedule to follow, or procedures whereby they might enjoy themselves a little longer outside of perfect knowledge. So that he might know himself this way too, Anu created Ariel, the soul of his soul. Ariel bled through the Orbis as a new force called time. With time, various aspects of the Orbis began to understand their natures and limitations. They took names like Magnus or Mara or Zen. One of these, Lorkhan, was more of a limit than a nature, so he could never last long anywhere. As he entered every aspect of Anwiel, Lorkhan would plant an idea that was almost wholly based upon limitation. He outlined a plan to create a soul for the Orbis, a place where the aspects of aspects might even be allowed to self-reflect. Even Ariel, when told he would become the king of the new world, agreed to help Lorkhan. So they created the Mundus, where their own aspects might live and become the Et Ada. So they created the Mundus, where their own aspects might live and became the Et Ada. But this was a trick, as Lorkhan knew. This world contained more limitations than not, and was therefore hardly a thing of Anu at all. Mundus was the house of Sithis. As their aspects began to die off, many of the Et Ada vanished completely. Some escaped, like Magnus, and that is why there are no limitations to magic. Others, like Ifri, transformed themselves into the Elnafey, the Earthbones, so that the whole world might not die. Some had to marry and make children just to last. Each generation was weaker than the last, and soon there were Aldmer. Darkness caved in. Lorkhan made armies out of the weakest souls and named them men, and they brought Sithis into every quarter. Ariel pleaded with Anu to take them back, but he had already filled their places with something else. But his soul was gentler and granted Ariel his bow and his shield so that he might save the Aldmer from the hordes of men. Some had already fallen, like the Chimer, who listened to the tainted Et Ada, and others, like the Bosmer, had already soiled Time's line by taking mannish wives. Ariel could not save Altmora, the Elder would, and it was lost to men. They were then chased south and east to Old Elnafey, and Lorkhan was close behind. He shattered that land into many. Finally, Trimanek, Ariel's greatest knight, knocked Lorkhan down in front of his army, and reached in with more than hands to take his heart. He was undone. The men dragged Lorkhan's body away and swore blood vengeance on the heirs of Ariel for all time. When Trinimac and Ariel tried to destroy the heart of Lorkhan, it laughed at them. It said, "This heart is the heart of the world, for one was made to satisfy the other." So Ariel fastened the thing to an arrow, and let it fly long into the sea, where no aspect of the new world may ever find it. Now settle down, my neighbors. I hear your grumbles and words of disdain. But remember, we've met this evening to learn, and that's just what we're doing. Before you let your hatred for the elves' racism fester, let's first dissect this story as we have the others. The Altmer story begins with a familiar ring, the existence of Anu, and the creation of limitation which Sithis embodies. This relationship is what creates the Orbris. We hear again the adage of time leading to the perception of self, and eventually creation. And as you well know by now, eventually Lorkhan comes about, and tricks the other aspects of being into creating Mundus, our world. Though this is where things get interesting. I urge you, my dear neighbors, to consider the second half of the story as a mimicry of the first. To begin, Mundus was created, just as Anwiel and Sithis were created. After learning of this trickery, some spirits escaped. Others became the Elnafey, or the Earthbones, though, so that the world wouldn't die. This sacrifice draws my mind to my understanding of Anu. The Elnafey became the soul of souls, for Mundus, if you will, while the other Et Ada that did not become Elnafey digressed into the weak Aldmer. They embody limitations, or Sithis, if you will, just as Lorkhan's men do. This second half of the myth is almost identical to the first. The story goes on to tell of a war where limitation fights the soul of all things, a constant push-pull of Anwiel and Sithis. Now, I may just be a foolish scholar, though it wouldn't surprise me if this Aldmeri myth of war was no more than a story that never occurred. A story which almost too conveniently mimics their concept of creation itself. One which allows the Altmer to continue feeding their vehement jealousy of godhood, while also giving ample reason to disdain men. If I've learned one thing from my studies of this myth, it's that the ancient elves were quick to point fingers and slow to relish in victory. I'll keep that in mind when deciding what to think of their beliefs. Thus, our reading of the Monomyth has concluded. But don't go reaching for your coats just yet. I think it is still important to consider the implications of these stories now that we have heard them. The two main themes conveyed throughout the entirety of the Monomyth are the existence of Anwiel and Sithis. as well as the postulation that self-ponderance leads to the concept of time, which in turn allows creation. Always in that order. Now, if studying these themes can teach us anything philosophical, it's that praying or meditation gives birth to understanding within ourselves and of the time that we exist in, the present moment. Living in the moment, then, if you will, leads to creation. This can mean a multitude of things, whether it is imperial ingenuity, pious enlightenment, or, of course, if you are a god, life itself. Limitation, war, despair, all elements contrary to what we perceive of as a happy life. Well, we cannot escape these things. Let us refer back to the quote at the introduction of the Monomyth. In Mundus, conflict and disparity are what bring change, and change is the most sacred of the 11 forces. Change is the force without focus or origin. Change brings about everything, and as we've learned today, all of creation depends upon the push and pull of Anwiel and Sithis. If that is the case, and we owe everything in our lives and everything wonderful within them to change, then why should we ever fight change and limitation? War, despair, hardship of any kind will always lead to something new. Make of that what you will. I thank you all for joining me here tonight. I look forward to more future readings with you. If you enjoyed our reading today, please let me know and inform your friends as well. I have future readings planned, of course, but if any of you are interested in particular topics or books, please let me know. I wish you all a beautiful night. Until next time.